Here's part 3 of reading the story of Noah and the flood. Just on the last point I made in the last video about comparing the flood story in the Bible to the flood story in the ancient Near East, or in Babylon. Just to emphasize how important that is, that the God of Israel cares about morality, and even more important, the thing that was driving the flood was violence and corruption. Okay, and I'm going to explore that theme some more in this video, but just know, so God's justice is rooted in His love and concern. That's the point, because if violence means there's, at the very least, there's a lot of murder, you could say, a lot of bloodshed in the land. And so God is trying to prevent that. He's trying to protect victims, right? He's trying to keep people safe. And that's rooted in love, like a concern for others. So that will happen a lot in the Old Testament, actually. God is responding to the cries for justice. And I'm going to show you that here, at least in this story, in just a second. But keep that in mind. So too often we read these stories about God's punishment in the Old Testament as if God were going to punish you or me. And we look at ourselves and we know that we're not perfect. And we know that we're probably worthy of punishment in some sense, but we're kind of but I don't think I should drown in a flood or even burn up in a fiery conflagration, I'm not that bad, and so we put ourselves in the story, and we don't realize what's being talked about here is extreme acts, extreme levels of violence. It's not just a little bit, and it's not necessarily even the little bit that you and I may experience in our lives, or even the little bit of violence that we sometimes dish out because we're cruel in our words or in our thoughts, or that level of violence isn't necessarily what the flood's talking about. Okay, so then I'm going to try to show you that now. But anyway, the point is, I'm going to get into proportionality is what I'm saying, but just at the very least, recognize that God's justice in this story is rooted in His love and His concern for people. Okay, and that's what's motivating Him. So I mentioned you had to read the whole story. So let's look at the biblical story now. And the story doesn't start with Noah and the flood. It starts after the fall. So we got to go back to that point. And I'm going to do other videos about Cain and Abel and Enoch and stuff. But just real quick, if you remember, when Adam and Eve fell, the Lord said that the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent, and the seed of the serpent would bite the heel of the seed of the woman. And so there's this dichotomy set up in the fall story of two different seeds. Okay, and you and I, again, we read these stories atomistically. We read them verse by verse or even chapter by chapter, instead of seeing them as one giant story, right? And at the very least, you should see Genesis as one giant story, and because it's all these stories about the generations of X, Y, and Z, and it's just showing you, the next generation, the next thing. It's like an origin story. And then, actually, I think the whole Bible can be read as a unified story in a certain sense, but we hardly ever look at it from that perspective. And I'm just saying, so let's do that now. And the fall story is a precursor to the flood story. And what it's setting up is there will be these two seeds. And the story from that point forward starts to trace two seeds. And it's set up by starting off with two brothers, right? Cain and Abel. And in that story, Abel is, potentially the seed of the woman that's going to crush the head of the snake. And Cain is potentially the seed of the serpent that's going to bite the heel of the other seed, right? And that anticipation of like who will be the seed here in this story should be read throughout the rest. Like, so when they go into these genealogies and they trace the line of Cain through the next few chapters of Genesis, and they trace the line of Seth, who replaces Abel after Abel's murdered. That's one of the reasons, I should say, why they're doing those genealogies, is they're tracing out the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. They're showing you like here are the genealogical lines that might actually fulfill these prophecies, and we're going to look at these prophecies, the prophecy from about the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, and see what happens here. Like, can we trace this out? Okay, and again, this is probably being put together at the time of the fall, the Babylonian exile. At the fall of Israel and gone into exile, and it's tracing out and showing this story. Okay, so you can see though in the story, Cain kills Abel, and then Seth has to replace Abel. And when Cain kills Abel, it says that Abel's blood will cry out from the ground to God. And that's a cry for justice. That's a demand for justice, right? So when we talk about like the atonement or God having to satisfy the demands of justice, God is doing it out of love, right? There's somebody who's been hurt or harmed, and God needs to listen to the cry, because he's full of love, because he's merciful, because he's a good person, he's honorable. And so his justice sometimes is meant to protect the vulnerable, or to or those that are innocent, or those that are victims, right? So keep that in mind, and that's rooted right there in that first story. That's like when you read in the Book of Mormon, it just says the demands of justice. And these stories are talking about the same thing. They're just using these they're actually really cool metaphors of demands of justice. The Abel's blood cries out, like, this wasn't fair. What happened to me isn't right. And something needs to be done about it, right? Okay, so we'll get into how God responds to that when I talk about Cain. It's actually a surprising way. It's not the way we normally think about it. But anyway, so from that point forward, one of the things that happens to Cain, and if you remember, now the Book of Moses makes this much more clear than the Genesis story. But Cain basically is the father of the Gadian robbers, in a sense. He's the father of like secret combinations. Like, basically, hey, let's all get together and we can do bad things. We can murder, right? And we can rob. We can do acts of violence and get what we want. Okay, that's the kind of violence that's being set up for the Noah story, right? It's like real legitimate corruption and violence. Like, the secret combinations is corruption, and they're violent, and that's the problem. So Cain starts this process like this. He plants a seed, you could say. He starts a whole lineage of people who are going to follow the same path that Cain followed, of corruption and violence, to get what they want. And if we just combine together and like swear an oath, a covenant together to we can get away with whatever. We can do whatever we want and get what we want, and no one can do anything about it, right? That's what a secret combination is. And so Cain sets this up, and he covenants with Satan in the Moses story to do this. So he's literally like becoming a covenantal son of Satan. He's the seed of Satan. And then because of what he does, the ground, God says to him, the ground will no longer produce food for you. Like, Cain was a farmer, right? That's why he brought fruit in his offering, was he was a farmer. And his offering was rejected. And we'll get, again, I don't want to get too far into the Cain thing, but I got to set it up enough to talk about the flood story. So anyway, the Cain does this. He's a farmer, but then because he sows blood, he sows murder in the ground. And this, again, you have to know the creation story as I set it out in my firesides. The ground represents justice too. Like, whatever you plant, you'll reap. Whatever you sow, you'll reap. And Cain sowed murder. He planted his brother's blood in the ground, and now he's going to reap that reward, which is death. So God basically says, hey, you're just getting what you deserve. Like, the ground is going to return to you what you sowed. So you sow death, and now it won't produce fruit for you anymore. Life will no longer come out of the ground for you. So Cain is stuck, right? And what he does from that point forward is, because he can't be a farmer anymore, basically, because justice is going to shut itself off from him and shut life off from him. He has to start, he builds a city, okay? And you build a city because you can specialize labor. You know, you can do specialized labor. Not everyone has to be a farmer in a city. There can be some people who are in charge. Just like in Babylon, in that story I was telling you, the city of Babylon, the kings of Babylon don't, you know, and the priests and the gods of Babylon don't do the work. They don't do the farming. They have their servants do the farming, and then they bring their offerings to the idols as taxes or whatever. And then the kings and priests and the gods of Babylon say that they'll protect those servants, right? That's their job. So Cain basically establishes a city so that he can offer the services of a king, offer the services of, like, I'll protect you as long as you bring me, you know, taxes and food and stuff, okay? And it's that division of labor that Cain is setting up, but he's doing it in a corrupt, secret combination way, because I don't want to say that all cities are bad, because the juxtaposition of Cain is Enoch and his city. And in fact, Cain's son is Enoch in the story. And Cain's city is named after his son, Enoch. So there's the city of Enoch that's like the children of the seed of the serpent. And then there's the city of Enoch, like the one that gets translated into heaven. So not all cities are bad, right? And we're going to talk about the juxtaposition in more detail, but when I get to Enoch. But just right now, for the purposes of the flood story, Enoch is the good Enoch city, you know, takes care of the poor and loves everybody and all that, and is unified. Whereas the city of Enoch, that's the son of Cain, is built on social classes, and I do this, and I'll, you know, it's based off of like a secret combination type of mentality in social classes, and there's a lower class and an upper class and a whatever. And I'm not saying that classes are bad necessarily either. I'm just saying, I'm trying to help you understand, like, the differences between the two cities of Enoch. Anyway, the line of Cain just keeps getting more and more violent. That's what that story from Cain all the way to the flood is telling us, is that they get more and more violent. They become more Gadiant and Robber-like. More violence, more corruption meaning like governmental corruption even, right? That where the people in charge are just Gadiant and robbers, like in the Book of Mormon. It gets super violent, right? That's what's leading up to the flood, okay? So when that puts it into more context of why there would need to be a flood, because that's part 3. I got to pick up a kid here, and I'll get into, you know, my next part. I'll talk about the sons of God and the daughters of men and all that stuff, and then we'll get into a few other things too.